There's more people.
Okay. Yes, some people are coming in late. So.
People are freaking out, I think.
So this is the second part of the three-part lectures that I'm doing on Arabic natural language processing. And last time we talked about orthography issues, focusing only on the script. And today the goal is to do morphology and syntax. So this is the focus of today. All right, so morphology. It helps to think of Arabic, when you think of morphology, I guess, maybe for any other languages too, to think of two different aspects of the morphology. First of all, is the type of the morphology, which is more of how you do the morphology. What are you actually doing there? And there we can talk about concatenative morphology, where you have basically something you're stringing together. So you have a stem, you have a prefix, and you have a suffix, you have circumfix around it. And then there's another type that is usually thought of when people talk about any of the Semitic languages, which is templatic morphology, where there you talk about a root and a pattern that you're intersecting together. Now this is different type of discussion of morphology than a discussion of the functionality of the morphology, which usually you talk about, well, what are you creating here? So there we talk about derivational versus inflectional. And derivational, in principle, you're creating a new word. Now it depends on the theory that you're using. You could say I'm creating a word from some other word, or I'm creating always from a root and a set of patterns. And in Arabic, this kind of derivation where you have a new word being created is templatic most of the time.
Is what?
Templatic. I'll get to the details of what these different types are. To contrast it with inflectional morphology, where you basically have the same basic word, meaning the basic, biggest chunk of meaning, so to speak. The basic meaning of the word is the same. However, you're varying other features of it, like its tense, its number, its gender, etc. And in Arabic, this is mostly concatenative, but it could also be templatic. So I'll talk now more in detail about what these different types are. So templatic morphology, you talk about having a concept of a root and a concept of a pattern. So a root in Arabic is going to be a three radical root. Usually there are three, most of them are three radicals, some are four, very few are five.
4 or 5 what?
Radicals, which basically
In
would
one word there are 4 or 5 radicals.
well, the root itself.
It's like a composed.
No, it's not a compose. We're not talking about the word level. This is just the root. So the root here is a very abstract concept. So KTB is the concept of something that has to do with writing. So it covers a lot of words that are derived from it.
How many radicals do we have here? 3.
Here you have 3 radicals, yes.
Because K by itself means something.
Yeah, well, not that the K by itself means something. The combination of K, T, and B together is what gives you the root in this case.
So why do you call the separate thing a radical? Because it combines with other things?
It's just the terminology that a root is composed out of a number of radicals. You just refer to K as a radical, T as a radical, and B as a radical. There is...
It's the Latin word for root.
But is it also because it has an orthographic form?
I don't think that's actually the reasoning. I mean, I know there is a theory of root morphology that goes within the structure of the root. And there the claim is that actually each one of these contributes some meaning. So there is a study of like the pairs, that roots that have K and T at the beginning of them share some semantics. So KTB and KTD and KTM would share some semantic meaning. But it's really...
That happens in a number of languages, and they're called pseudomorphisms.
Right. So, and it's not really, I mean, I don't believe in it myself, yeah. But it's just a terminology to refer to these as the radicals and the whole thing as the roots. And then you get a pattern where you basically have a formation that has empty slots where the different radicals from the root will fit in. So this one here has an A and an E in it, and so the K, the T, and the B fill in, and you get katib this way. There's an inversion here because I'm displaying it in Arabic. Right.
KTB has 2 realizations. Is it?
No, this is the root. This is the pattern. This is the actual lemma.
What's the pattern on the left?
The pattern on the left is...
Same root.
it's the same root, but it's a different pattern, right? And here, that pattern is the pattern for creating the object of something or the result of the effect of something, and this is the doer of something. So here, katib is writer and maktub is something that is written.
And it still comes from...
It still comes from that root.
The form is completely different as far as I
Right.
understand.
Well,
But it does come from the same root.
right. It comes from the same root. Now you have to kind of abstract from the different
Because
surface
the
forms.
A, B, and B are there too.
Right.
At the point.
And they are exactly, that is the point. They are there and they are in the same relative order. Arabic will make things look a bit different when they're written at this point because of the orthography. But if you go with a language like Hebrew, for example, with every form stays pretty much almost the same except for the last letter sometimes, you can see it better. You can see that the sequence is still there.
Nizar, does the pattern also have semantics like the
Right.
Is that the pattern that says the doer of whatever it is?
Yes. So this is the basic example that's usually used to explain. You have this that has to do with writing. This has to be doing something. This is the something that was done, and then putting the two pieces together. Now it's the person who does the writing, and here it's the thing that's being written, and that's the assumption here usually. Now I'll show you cases where that's not the case anymore.
So if I took eat instead of KTB,
Right.
that would be the person.
Right, so if you have akala, which would be the root for eating, it would be akil and ma'kul, and that would be valid. Akil is a person who's doing the eating. And now here, it's also a person who does writing, a person who is a writer as a profession, right? So you have these semantic variations. Whereas an akil, not that eating as a profession does exist. I suppose there is. If you're an eater, as a profession, then that would be a possibility. But you can see here, katib has that specific sense of writer, but also the sense of somebody who does writing. Yes?
Do you ever get order changes in your patterns?
You don't get any order changes from the root. So the pattern will preserve the order changes from the order of the root. It would not modify it. However, sometimes there's doubling that happens. So the middle radical could be doubled in some cases. There are also cases where the second and third are both doubled. So it would be the equivalent of like katabtab, but it's not as common. And so the view is usually that this lemma or laksim here is constructed from the meaning from these two, but this has a lot of idiosyncrasy. I mean, this is the theory of how things work. In reality, it's much more complicated. So when you talk about the roots, so this is the notion of writing, like I said. So these are all words that are derived from that same root. So you have katab, kitab, which is book, something that is written, which is this maktub, but also letter, as in a letter that you send to someone. Maktaba is a library. It's derived with a pattern that specifies location of doing something.
So the ma has some...
The ma in that case, the ma and the ending also specify that, yes, there is a location going on. But notice, like, the maktab is an office, which is a location where you might do writing. Of course, you do other things in an office. You do other things in a library, like reading. But the location of a library is defined as maktaba, not as, maqra'a, which would be if a place you would read books. So there's a lot of idiosyncrasies there. I mean, it's an interesting... The decisions were all idiosyncratic in my view of how these things were derived. And here, for example, the maktab versus maktaba is an interesting case too, where the maktaba has a feminine ending. It's the same basic pattern of location, but there's nothing. It's not really clear why a library is feminine, whereas an office is masculine. I mean, it's. There are also other kind of additional complexities. We're talking about truth. Is that sometimes you. Yeah, go ahead.
If somebody were to claim a neologism, which is like library, but meaning the place where you read instead of the place where you write,
yes,
would an Arabic speaker recognize what it was intended to be?
Yeah. I would bet yes.
Yeah.
And there are lots of cases where people are coining new words. For example, one approach to taking foreign words and incorporating them in Arabic is not just to take the word and just change the phonemes, but actually create some underlying roots.
And then,
so you create some underlying root, and then you use a pattern that is an Arabic pattern for it. So one example I saw recently, which I was surprised because I've never seen this word before, was, so I knew always of the word demokratiya, which means democracy. So this is an exact mapping from democracy, right? But then they basically hypothesized that there is a root, democrat, which is a 5 radical root, and then they put it in a pattern called demokrata, which means democratization. So that ability is something that's interesting for languages, that have this, the level of abstraction of a root and additional power of patterns.
How are the patterns made to accommodate 5 radical roots?
There are some that are only used for, the patterns go by the specific root set. So there are a few number of 5 radical roots, and they have a small number of patterns associated with them. So there are less options than in the other cases.
So this kind of borrowing happens in all languages. I'm not clear on what you mean. I'm not clear what you're saying is special about the way that Arabic does this.
Right. So what's special in the case of Arabic in this case is that instead of saying taking the word democratization, instead of borrowing and saying it as democratization, actually just writing it that way and considering el-democratization or democratization or something like this, just making it part of the system, you actually hypothesize some new root, and then plug it into patterns. So democrata...
That happens in all languages.
You can argue that, sure, but this level of abstraction of actually taking it to the roots. Okay. All right.
Sorry to keep you. Can you estimate how many templates or patterns or vocalisms there are? I was always under the impression it was like a dozen, but it seems like there must be many more.
The patterns I would say it's about 200, 250 patterns.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
And some of them are bound to certain, some of them are specific to certain subsets of features that they express. But yeah.
250, 200 or 250 would then be divided. Some will apply for 3 radical roots,
Right,
some
right,
for 4.
Right.
Almost all roots are 3 characters.
Oh, most of them, yes.
Yeah, or occasionally 2.
Well, the 2 thing, the case of the 2 is kind of funny because the last one is considered a doubler in that case.
Yeah.
So, and the way it behaves, it can participate in 3 radical patterns where the last 2 are doubled. So there, the assumption, people think of it as it's just a geminate. So it's, X, A, like A, B, B, basically, would be the form. I think what I meant, Dan, is I agree that borrowing happens, and it happens in interesting ways. Maybe what I wanted to say, not to be as less specific here, is that in Arabic, this borrowing can happen also at the level of the root. It's not just borrowing at a surface level, integrating with the concept of root in Arabic. So if that concept doesn't exist in other places, you won't...
I think basically any language that has inflectional morphology this will have.
Okay. Except this is more about derivational rather than inflectional. We can talk some more about it.
Very well, great.
Right. So there's this example here is just to show that there's also this question about when you talk about a root and as being such an abstract level of representation, what exactly is the meaning here? So lahm, LHM has something to do with meat. That's the first concept that comes to mind. And so you get meat, you get butcher is al-ham, a person who does something to do with his business is meat, so to speak. But you also get another notion, which is the notion of battle, or a fierce battle, or an epic of some sort. And you say, well, is it actually about battling, or is it about meat? And, well, maybe after a battle, it's like a butcher shop, there's bodies everywhere. Is that what they're trying to say? But then what is the abstract meaning there? Is this a metaphor, really, or is it something actually underlying it? And this example was originally picked for actually comparative Arabic Hebrew, which it makes even more interesting there because one is more dominant in one way in Arabic, the other one is more dominant in Hebrew, and then...
Dominant, you mean it acquires one meaning
but
in Hebrew and the other meaning?
Well, they share some of the meanings. So the basic meaning in Hebrew has to do with bread, not meat, but then the secondary meaning of battle is still there, and the third meaning of soldering, of actually taking 2 things and linking them together, appears in both languages. So there, it's not really, again, clear. Well, there's this metaphor of battle as a place where people run into each other and they're soldered. Somebody pointed out in one of my presentations that solder and soldier might be related in some way. I have no idea. But this creates an interesting question of, what exactly is the meaning of the root here? Do you say that there's actually homonymic roots, that there's actually several different types of roots that are independent, that they share something? It's not clear. Just to point out, this is quite complex. Patterns are also thought of as having some defined meaning that they add. We saw some examples before. This is the set of patterns associated with the verb. There's a kind of 4 more that I'm ignoring here. These are the major 10. And if you work with Arabic morphology, people will refer in the West to these patterns, to these forms as form 1, form 2, form 3 for the basic patterns. So I marked here the 1, 2, 3 tells you the location of the radical from the root, and the different vowels are the vowels that appear. So 1A, 2A, 3 is basically ketab, whereas the doubler in the second form is ketab and katab. Katab is one of those. This third form is interesting. It has to do with interacting with other. Just to give you an example of what kind of meaning is usually added. So when you do some action where you're interacting with someone else, so in this case, if you do the writing interactively, where you write to someone and they write back, that's corresponding. And that's how you get katab, meaning to correspond with someone. Qatal is to fight with someone, and because you need 2 people to be doing the qatal. No, the fighting is not actually shown here.
It's the same pattern.
It's the same pattern as this one, but qatal has to do with killing, and qatal is to be engaged in fighting, where you're both trying to kill each other.
So that root is KTL, is that right?
In that case, yes.
Yeah.
And it would just be similar, but with an L at the end. Yeah. So I've talked so far about derivational morphology, and let's suppose, at some basic level, the root and the pattern together give you this concept of a lemma or a lexeme or a dictionary entry of some sort. Now we're going to talk about the different inflections where you have different features being added. And this is where this is the part that I said earlier, tends to be more concatenative, but can be also templatic to some extent. So here, the features that we think of usually associated with Arabic words would include something like part of speech. So there's different subset. A traditional subset, there's always this question that comes with working with Arabic. Is this a noun or an adjective? And how come sometimes it's inconsistently marked one way or the other? Or how come my dictionary says it's both noun and adjective? Traditional Arabic grammar thinks of these as there's only 3 parts of speech. There's the noun, which is noun, adjective, blah, blah, everything has to do with that. Then there's the verb, and then there's everything else, literally. And it's every particle you can imagine just fits in that third classification. So there's a very coarse classification of Arabic morphology. Computationally, you get something bigger. You get something as complex as the one you'll see in the Arabic tree bank, if you're working with it, that has full specifications of inflections. That big set would be, in principle, could have 22,000 different tags. In practice, it's around 2,000 tags like that appear in the Arabic tree bank. So there's like the reduced set, the B set, which I know some of you are working with, and that's 24 tags only that were made to look similar to the English to some extent. It was inspired by that level of complexity. So for noun, why do we need these tags? Well, for nouns, you have variations. So number, in terms of number, you have singular, dual, plural, a collective, plural. This is like a bunch of things. Gender is masculine and feminine. That's similar to many languages. Definiteness is marked on the word. Case, and also you get for the nouns a possessive clitic. Now you could argue that this might be something orthographic, that you always put it together, and that's valid possibly. Given this definition of a word as basically being something that's separated between space, these are the features that you'll see between the 2 spaces. So you'll see a possessive clitic that says, his car or her car or my car.
When you say, go back to when you say that that there are only 3 parts of speech.
Yes.
Is it? Parts of speech designate a function of a word in sentence.
Right. And that's not.
So what does it mean?
Right.
So is the point that the particles are undifferentiated?
They're not.
Therefore, they don't have a definite function?
No, they do have different functions. I mean, clearly
So
this is...
So why not say that
Right.
there are more parts of...
No, I mean, so there is actually, I mean, here, because you could have, in principle, a part-of-speech tag set that is really big. So let me put it this way. When you think of English part-of-speech tags, every part-of-speech tag within a set of, like, what, 64 or something around that number, could actually tell you everything about the morphology of the word you're interested in. And maybe even a little bit about its possible functionality too, right? In Arabic, to be able to give a tag that would tell you everything about a word, you need this 22,000 number, right? So basically people here, I mean, when this view of, the traditional view of basically talking about three types, basically says, well, every possible variation of verbs, every possible inflection variant, you know, I'm not going to care about. I'm just saying, you know, this is verbs versus noun behave functionally in a very different way, and that's enough to describe, you know, what's going on. Computationally, I agree with you. This is too coarse. It's not good enough.
And Arab would recognize
The difference between nouns and verbs?
no,
Right.
but would in fact, if you told him these parts of speech that you have their computation on,
Right.
he would be able to
Well,
tag a corpus.
Well,
Or, I mean,
with some training, of course.
Yes.
So here's part of the
but
reason. Right.
You never native speakers
Right.
feeling for it.
So
right?
here's, well, to some extent, yes. Except, see, the view is this traditional set is talking something about the morphology of the word rather than its functionality, right? So and now this noun class includes a lot of things that look adjectival, right? And because you could use an adjective without a noun, without any problem, adjectives inflect fully the same way that nouns do inflect in Arabic. So there's a lot of information. You can just say, you know, the old, and you mean, you know, the old female or the old male and or whatever. And there you don't need to have a noun, right? In Arabic traditional view of the grammar, there is the word, you know, that refers to an adjective, but it's considered a functionality, that this noun is acting as an adjective. It's acting as a modifier. So that's, I mean, that's the kind of part of the problem, that you could use anything, either adjective or noun, in the place of a noun without any problems. So that's what makes it a bit harder to distinguish between them. No, the particles end up being subclassified by basically belonging in certain classes, where you actually end up saying, well, this is the auxiliary type 1 and this is the auxiliary type 2, but they're still considered, you know, subset of these classes. Now, for the verb, you get also a lot of features. So aspect, this perfective, imperfective concept I'll come back to again. It basically refers to this separation of when you talk about a verb, of something being completed or incomplete, right? So something that's completed tend to be in the past, and that's the tense that's usually associated with the perfective aspect. And something that is incomplete is something that I'm doing right now, or I'm planning to do, or I will do, or it's the idea of me doing it. And these subtle variations interact with mood to actually be all specified. Voice, active and passive. That,
I don't know what you see.
yeah, it's hard to explain.
It's already hard to explain.
Right, and the subject, of course, the person, number, and gender features of the subject also appear as part of the morphology of the verb itself. And similar to the nouns, where we saw that you could have a pronominal clitic at the end, you could have a pronominal clitic here too. But for the verb, it's the object. It's not, you know, well, for the noun, it was the possessive. And in addition to these, you could still have, again, given this orthographic definition of what you see on the paper between two white spaces, you can also get a conjunction and a preposition. So I'll show you an example of this. So here's a case of a noun, two nouns, and I marked in color, you know, the pieces that would appear in both of the forms. So this is one word. There's space here and space here. So you have a conjunction followed by a preposition, followed by an article, and then you get to the part that is the base of the noun, and you get a plural and a possessive. So you get this walil maktabat. So wa is the conjunction, l is the preposition, this is the al, that is the definite article, here's the basic noun, and here's the plural. This is a feminine noun, so it gets a feminine ending. Right, and if you, actually you would not see this here directly, but if you can recognize the Arabic script, you'll see that some letters in some cases are missing. So this A disappears, and I refer to it down here in this bullet at the bottom. So these are special cases where certain things, the orthography changes. And I'll come back to talking about this problem of segmentation and tokenization and how it becomes hard to decide what to do there. In this other word, biyut, which is the blue word, is houses. In that case, the noun and the plural are merged together. This is a case of broken plural, which is basically a class of making plurals by changing the pattern. So the basic form is bayt, and instead of saying baytin or baytat, just by adding a suffix, you create a totally different pattern word. And so this is the problem, and this is the case where it's templatic, but it's actually referring to an inflection.
So how is that different from irregular plurals?
So regular plurals, as in this case, for example,
Like irregular plurals in English.
irregular plural. It's very similar to irregular plurals. I mean, the mouse, mice, goose, geese are very similar. The issue in Arabic is that this is much more common.
Sort of like house heights.
Yes, house heights. Yes, so it's quite common. And verbs also have a similar behavior here. So there's just an example where it's and, will, we, say, it. And this is how, all these pieces, the conjunction, the tense marker, verb, subject and object.
And that sequence is a standard sequence.
That is a standard
The one
sequence.
that you have on
Yes,
top of it.
yes.
So it's always going to be like that.
It's always going to be like that within the word
Never
morphology.
tense first, then conjunction.
No, thank God. Yes.
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 Allah.
Yes. So yes, within the word boundary, it's quite regular. You know exactly where things go. So this is kind of some of these slides were intended to introduce you to certain concepts that when you read about papers about Arabic morphology, you'll see these concepts repeated. So it's kind of assumed that you would know what's going on. So Arabic verbs, in terms of the conjugation paradigm, let's say, you can talk about, there's two types of paradigms, one for the perfective, one for the imperfective. The perfective only has this feature that it only has suffixes. So sometimes it's referred to as the S form or the S stem because it has a suffix. And this one would have the P form or P stem because it has a prefix. But it really has a prefix and a suffix associated with it always in standard Arabic. That changes in dialects and in some other Semitic languages. So this is, of course, quite simplified. I did not include the feminine forms in here just for space. But this is also very regular. So here you get, you know where the circumfix is always going to go. You know where the suffix is going.
Is the dual plural distinction still respected in all dialects?
No. The dual in the verb is gone pretty much.
Dual and what?
The dual form is gone. The dual for the verb. The dual for the noun still survives, but the dual form for the
Dual
verb.
means, we in Czech have dual.
Right.
And like with both hands is dual, if you say something else. So is that how you have it?
Not for hands in this case, but yes, for two individuals, like two people came. Or the two people, the president of this country and the president of that country met, and then they talked. The they talked is they too talked in that case. So yeah, I mean, in the dialect, this distinction is totally gone. It basically merges with the plural, so you only use plural form in that case.
How about in MSA?
In MSA, it's still there. I mean, yeah, it's enforced. This is one of those cases where in spontaneous speech is one of the hardest to produce, like continuously, because you have to basically not just generate the form, but also everything that agrees with it and every adjective that agrees with it has to also be in the dual, and it's just much easier to drop it and talk plural instead. So, okay, so in terms of ambiguity, I'm making some distinctions here just to be able to talk.
Excuse me,
Yes.
stay with it. Is there an academy like in France which keeps it preserved? And
Right. So there is 5 academies actually. It's part of the problem. There is Cairo, Damascus, Amman, and Rabat, and I can't remember what the fifth one is. I wonder if it's Baghdad, I'm not sure. And they actually generate, in some cases, standards that's for new words that are slightly different. But their goal, as stated, is to preserve the standards, the classical. So a lot of this grammar is classical Arabic grammar, except that for modern day, you want to be able to plug in new words. And there'll be some, they're not all consistent with each other necessarily when it comes to new forms. Okay, so in terms of, when you talk about ambiguity here, so there is a certain amount of derivational ambiguity. So this is when you have the same root and the same basic pattern, you create, in principle, the same lemma, but then it means different things. So the meaning part is just very different. So the sequence qaida is, means a basis or a principle. It also means military base. So the first sense is the way I would talk about, a rule in mathematics, for example. The second one is about a base, and the third one is about the organization, Al-Qaeda. That's derived from that basic form with a definite article attached to it, right? So that, in a sense, a derivational ambiguity. There's nothing about the pattern or the root that is telling us how these things are different that
but
way.
they use the word qaida because it is a base, right?
Yes, but now...
I mean, that's what they want to convey.
Yes, and actually maybe even the ambiguity, the kind of something that's very principled, or you're bringing, that's implied there. I mean, that, we know that, but you still end up now with a noun that behaves in a special way sometimes because it's a proper noun, right? Now then you also get inflectional ambiguity. So the first example I used there of the taktub, which is you write or she writes, that's just, it's actually kind of an odd ambiguity. They have exactly the same form. This is across all Semitic for some reason, that you write, you male write, and she female writes are the same form for some reason. So this kind of ambiguity is always going to be there. You have to look at the word. Even if it's fully diacritized, you wouldn't necessarily know who's doing the writing.
Writes is something else.
He write is something else, and you female writes, write is something else. But
So
just
this is you male write.
you male write, yes.
And she
She female, yes, right. You also get segmentation ambiguity. So this is, for example, when you have a word like the one I have there with 3 letters, waw, jim, dal, it could be just the verb of he found, or it could be and grandfather, because you decide that the wa is the conjunction rather than part of the word itself. So remember the example that I showed you earlier with the L that deletes the alif. So there you also get more ambiguity, because for some reason nouns that start with L, you could end up having a sequence of 3 L's. And that is just, it's not that it's not allowed, it's what happens phonologically, some of the short vowels are deleted, so you end up with a situation where, remember the doubler, or the consonantal doubler kicks in, so one of the consonants is deleted. So you end up with basically 2 L's instead of 3, and you cannot tell that these 2 L's come because it was the preposition with the word, or is it the preposition with the definite article with the word. So that creates an interesting ambiguity there. Now, we've seen some of the cases where the optional diacritics create problems. So katib or katab, one is a noun, one is a verb, but they look the same without the diacritics. And you also get a big, this is kind of serious effect of the orthography interacting, where you get suboptimal spelling. So some of these forms, mentioned it in the first part of the, where you have the hamza appearing above and below the alif. Many times when people write, or hamza is the glottal stop. Yeah, and it has it has 7 different forms, and these are 2 forms of them that basically often people just don't click the right letter. They click the alif, and it's unambiguous enough that people can read without having any problems. The ta marbuta, which was the feminine ending, sometimes is written without the 2 dots on top, so it's ambiguous with another letter that actually could have a different functionality altogether. And in this last case, you get also 2 different forms of ya with dots and without dots.
And it's considered correct?
Well, it depends. It depends who you talk to. I actually don't like to condemn it. I think it's just fine. It's just part of the complexity of the language. But some people some people consider that you really have to do serious editing on text to get these pieces to be correct. and I have like different people, I think, with different personal styles put their thresholds at different places. So for example, for me, I don't care about this distinction. I'm always serious about the feminine, non-feminine ending. And this one, I also make sure that I put the final dots. But this last point, for example, in Egyptian Arabic, is the standard of putting ya at the end. So you end up spelling y at the end in a different way. It's just standard editing, you know. So and that creates some conflicts. So just to wrap on this. So what people tend to do, for example, in information retrieval or even actually in pre-processing for Arabic statistical MT is they just conflate these forms into just one. So you take the multiple forms of the Hamza and you conflate them into just Aleph, or you take the Tamarbutas and you just conflate it into a final H and you just don't worry about it. So that's an option. So here's an example where you get multiple sources of these ambiguities all interacting. So this is a three-lettered word, B-Y-N, and you could have these different readings of bayyana, he declared, demonstrated, bayyanna, they, feminine, plural, did that. You know, bayyin, bayna, biyin, and bin, as in the name, ben. Now, to talk about, you know, giving numbers for like, what are we talking about here, it's hard to do this. So this is, I'm saying it with like that, with some reservations, basically. What I did, I looked in the Buckwalter lexicon, and this now is dependent, you know, measuring this derivational ambiguity. So this is like the case of qaida, meaning principle, or meaning organization. You know, this is going to be what the Buckwalter lexicon distinguishes. There might be cases where Tim Buckwalter did not distinguish between cases, so I don't have the numbers for these. This is quite harder to measure, of course. So there you get around, you know, 1.09 entries per token. So it's the same token, about 9% of the time it will have another form.
Derivational ambiguity has to do with that we don't know what it was.
We don't know what its meaning is. No, we know what the radical is, we know what the pattern is, but we don't know what the meaning is. That the meaning could have like a very different meaning. And what was that? I'm talking about word sense ambiguity. Yes, it's word sense. And Buckwalter, to be clear, actually marks, in many cases, marks the different words with a special marker saying this is the first sense and this is the second sense. This is necessary in some cases because the plural of one sense sometimes is different from the plural of the first of another sense. So you could have the same word, but the plural form, the broken plural especially, is different looking. So to be able to encode that information, he had to do the separation.
What would this number be for English?
It depends. I mean, like I said, this number here is not looking at, I mean, it defined great senses, right? So it depends on what you define as the unit of meaning that you're measuring over. This was basically only what he had defined as these are the enough splits to make. So I think it's a really hard number to come up with for any language, including Arabic. But
how good is the coverage of Buckwalter's lexicon?
Buckwalter is pretty good. I mean, he's continually updating it. It has over 37,000 lexeme entries.
And most tokens that you find in the newspaper
you would find there.
With the correct analysis.
Yes, except of course for things like proper nouns, right?
Yeah.
These are much harder to cover. But in terms of his coverage, I'm pretty confident with his coverage.
Proper nouns will show up inflected as well.
Inflected for some things. So proper nouns would have a conjunction sometimes attached to them. Also, a preposition can be attached to them. You would not. I mean, in principle, you could have a possessive clitic like my Bill, kind of, or my John, but it's case markers do. But then most of the time they're not written. It's not written in the orthography, right? You won't see the nominative or the nominative, accusative, genitive tend to be just a short vowel, a diacritic, so it doesn't show anyway. And if you look at the spelling ambiguity, again, this is over the lexemes, not the forms of the words themselves. You get about 1.28 forms that have the same basic dictionary entry. Now, what I did, and again, these numbers, you have to say like which source and what version of. So this is the tree bank 1 version 2, which has a kind of a simplified Backwalter analysis where, for example, case is not indicate. If the case is not shown, he doesn't mention it at all. So in those, so if it's nominative, accusative, or genitive, it doesn't really matter. That distinction is not made. In the third version of the same tree bank, that distinction is made. And in that case, the number 2.5 jumps to 8.5 when you make these full distinctions. Yes, yes. So it's and I think the 8.5 is more proper kind of comparison with the English numbers. Kind of. I mean, if you're interested in doing translation into English, nominative versus accusative might not make a big difference unless you're interacting with parsing. So then it would be interesting. Yes.
And that graph is for cases where the diacritics are left out.
Yes, yes. So basically everywhere, I mean, it's really a feature of, partly now, the most recent version of Backwalter produces all the inflections all the time. So every entry will basically have all the possible inflections specified for it. And then the tree bank, they kept that, so they basically selected whether it's nominative or accusative or genitive every case. Whereas in the first 2 rounds of working on the tree bank, they didn't do that. All right. So this was all, interesting, but now, well, we have this corpus and we need to work with it, and what do we do, right? And here I basically describe what has been, what approaches people have taken, and kind of let you decide what would work for you. Is for every level, every kind of choice has advantages and disadvantages associated with it. So you can talk about a natural token, which is basically the word as it appears without without touching it at all. So just go for the spaces and split on those. And here you would have, additional characters. Remember that tatwil or elongation character that might actually be as part of the word. And unless you're interested in computationally modeling elongation patterns in Arabic, this is probably something you want to get rid of, right? So I kind of refer to this as the natural token as it appears. But the word really doesn't have those extra, graphic features that are part of them. And then you talk about, okay, well, this can be complex, and every word could have many forms. So, how do I deal with sparsity in this case? If I want to do language modeling, that's not good enough. You need something else. And you can choose to segment by doing just a pure segmentation, where you take the sequence and you decide, well, I'm going to learn to put spaces between the different pieces of the words. And there you have this decision of, well, what is it the pieces that you're going to be splitting over? So I've seen papers, for example, that says we're going to split over the morphemes. So every possible morpheme would be basically a separate piece, and now you end up with lots of a word could be broken up to 7 different pieces of tokens in that case. Here I basically said, well, if I only did conjunctions and prepositions, I'm going to separate those because they interact with syntax more heavily than the features on the word, then that might be good enough. But then in this case, you get this other effect of having, the alif that was deleted, or a feminine ending that was taken out when you add something like when you add the plural. And that could create another kind of ambiguity. The masculine form and the feminine form of the stem now would look the same. Do you want to count them as the same? I mean, in some cases that might be fine, but remember that office versus library, they have the same exact stem in that case, and that ambiguity you'll have to suffer basically. The Arabic tree bank tokens, the one that for people who are using the Arabic tree bank, they go with a 4-segment approach where they have conjunctions, preposition, pretty much everything else except for the clitic at the end. So you always have the pronominal clitic separated, the conjunction separated, and the preposition for the noun separated. But everything else is basically considered part of the form. So they reduced the set, but not incredibly too much. And this is enough reduction for doing tree banking. All of the other features will basically be dependent on that word. Whether it's definite or its case is something that is dependent on that word itself that shows in it. So it's not interacting with anything else. So that's the logic why this was enough to do. And in the tree bank, they also recover all the deleted letters. So each one, every word is basically a real word. You could actually pick it up and try to find if it appears anywhere else, and you'll find something that matches. You won't find, malformed words in the tree bank. And that, of course, makes the process of segmenting in preparation to parse with the tree bank a bit harder, because you have to do all that kind of work. So you also find other kind of segmentations that have been done on Arabic, depending on the resources that you use. So, for example, if you want to go and use the Buckwalter dictionary, you say, you have some idea that involves using the Buckwalter dictionary together with whatever you're doing. Well, there, again, beware. Buckwalter breaks things into 3 regions. There's a prefix region, a stem, and a suffix region. And his decision where to break is different from the tree bank's decision where to break. So the tree bank decision where to break actually kind of is partially in the suffix and partially in the prefix, but the stem can have stuff from both sides still. So it's much more complicated. So many times you see people like...
This has to do with search in a dictionary.
This has to do with a specific kind of a specific dictionary that was used.
So,
yes.
I mean, why
do you care?
I'm thinking of German now.
Okay.
Or where there are something with gas, something, etc. You can't look it up in the dictionary with the
Right.
K in front.
Right.
You have to get to the stem
Right.
to look it up. So
Right.
is that the reason why we want to break it up? Because we will look for it in the dictionary under the stem.
Right. So not exactly.
No.
No, not exactly. Although close. So this decision was made. This decision to split
Why
in this
is he
way.
breaking it up in the first place?
Right. He's breaking it in the first place because he wants to, instead of for every, he wants to basically, he's defining a finite state machine, really, where there's a bunch of prefix transitions, stem transitions, and suffix transitions. And he's basically saying, all of these stems will take this same kind of possible prefixes and this kind of suffixes. And that's what he's doing. The breakup is basically to minimize the size of the prefix dictionary, suffix dictionary, and stem. That's the only reason for why it was done. I'm just saying it
But
because...
I suppose I find the finite state machine according to the stem.
You could.
Did I find it in his list?
Right.
It's got to be ordered in some way, right?
Yes, in some ways, yes. I mean, there are... It's much more complicated because the stem, for example, in this case,
Yes.
if it was a dictionary entry, it would have the feminine ending attached to it, which it doesn't in this case, right? So I'm just saying that, these are the resources that are available, and, we're all trying to come up with solutions for certain things. So if you think, I can use a list of Arabic words, just kind of beware that that list might actually be segmented in a way inconsistent with what you're trying to do, and that could be where you lose. I mean, that's all I'm trying to say. Other approaches, also that have been done, basically take to deeper levels, of talking about a dictionary entry plus features, going to the root, and then you even get root versus pattern versus vocalism. So they take the vowels out of the pattern and say that the vowels actually have a meaning independent of the pattern. And this is true for verbs, but it's not true for nouns. So, again, depending on whose system you're using, just kind of be aware, like what level of what kind of information they're giving. And of course, another thing kind of has to be said. The less work you do on the word, the less decisions you have to make on disambiguating all the possible things you could do, right? So when you go to this level, deeper level, you could have multiple dictionary entries and multiple things that are going on, that you have to basically pick from later on to move to the next step. But if you for example, stop at doing this kind of segmentation, where you say, I'm just going to separate the conjunction, and that's the only decision I'm making. So you don't really need to know if the rest of the word is a noun or a verb. It doesn't really matter. All you care about is this a conjunction or not a conjunction? So and this task of separating the conjunction and the preposition does quite well. It's like in the order of like 99.2 accuracy on the word level. So people feel solid about it. Okay, I'm not going to go into these. This is just a list of references for things that are for actually a lot of the examples that I used where they came from. And I'm going to move on to the next step with syntax. Okay. So syntax. So even though we finished morphology, we're still not going to be done with morphology. Morphology is the most interesting part about Arabic, I think, for Arabic and LP. That's why most of work that's done is on the morphology. First, there's a lot of interaction between morphology and syntax. So, things like pro-drop and subject conjugation, I mean, that's similar to many other languages. But since, remember earlier we talked about the object clitics appearing as part of the verb form, well, that means that the morphology, a morphological system, a morphological analyzer should know something about whether the verb is transitive or intransitive. And that's really more of a syntactic type of information. You're trying to tell it about, the subcategorization to some level of that verb. So whether, a verb that's transitive can take a subject suffix and an object clitic, but then a verb that is intransitive cannot take the object, right? So these kind of distinctions you will see handled at some level in the morphology.
Am I to think that this plus means
the plus means that it is in the word itself.
It is in the word.
Yes.
So the object is, the verb and object are fused together.
Yes, are fused together.
Right.
Right. And then you also get, and I don't talk about this much later, but you could have a case where you have the verb and the object clitic, and then the subject is a complete NP that comes later, right? So as you're doing your parsing, you should know, well, there is actually the object I saw already. It came from the morphology. Then I have my NP. The different kind of interactions also between morphology and syntax, you see sometimes you get full agreement. So agreement is one of, this is also happens in many languages. Just kind of to point some interesting things here. So you can get full agreement between nouns and adjectives in terms of number, gender, definiteness. But you can also get a certain amount of partial agreement where they would only agree on gender. And this is one of the cases we'll talk about later with the verb and the subject, that sometimes there is partial agreement and sometimes there is full agreement. And there is interesting ways that happens, why that happens. Definiteness is another interesting feature that does interact with structure, and I'll give you more examples of these too. So definiteness here can be either definiteness that's intrinsic on the noun, so like a proper noun is considered to be definite by definition, whereas a noun, a common noun, would have a definite article attached to it. By the way, if I'm gonna run out of time, I already kind of knew, please let me know. I am out of time.
Yes.
Oh shoot. Well, let me
We started late, so.
we started slightly late, and I knew this was a really long discussion, so I can stop when, let me finish the slide, and then before we go into the syntax. So other interactions with morphology, case, obviously, whether the case of nominative is accusative is something that interacts with the structure. To some extent, Arabic has almost word-free order in certain cases, but then because of the effect of modern standard not being a living language, most of the time in actual text, there's very strict order that is used. You'll see the freeness appearing in poetry, for example, even in modern poetry. And also this problem with the short vowels marking case, and they're not there a lot of the time, that creates problems. This I've already mentioned. Also another interaction where, depending on where you break the preposition, so in this case the preposition is really is crossing a bracket in that case, so you have to break it or separate it before you can do any parsing. Okay. So this is just saying that same point. So next time we'll continue with the syntax and we'll go to the MT issues and the dialects. Thank you. Sorry for taking time.